Hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Warships Blitz with Terry. If it gets a little noisy outside, I once again have the window open because it is rather warm around here. But that's not why we're here. We're here to look at a brand new line in the tech tree, the Italian battleships. And I've got to admit, I've been excited about this because there's going to be, and it's not just another battleship line with the traditional set, but there's going to be some new mechanics, some new features, some things that we haven't had before. Most namely, I'm excited about large caliber semi-armor piercing and to see what that can do. So let's begin with actually having a quick look across the existing tech, the tech tree, at least as far as I can see it so far. I can see it from tier 5 to tier 9. There might be some tier 3 and tier 4 ships coming, and obviously there's going to be a tier 10 ship at some point. But this is what we have so far. Now, there are pre-existing Italian battleships, namely the Giulio Cesare and the Roma at tier 8, which is somewhat infamous for being a very, very, very powerful ship. So this is all very exciting, but none of these two have semi-armor piercing shells, obviously. So we start out, at least from, again, what we can see, at tier 5 with the Conte de Cavour. And we will be actually playing the Conte later on, and then taking a little bit of a closer look at the actual ship. This is still a Dreadnought class battleship, followed up by the Andrea Doria. If we have a little bit of a look at the statistics, at tier 6 we are still at 320mm. These are the bored out 305mm guns that the Italians were using at the time. So a very low caliber, but we've got lots of guns in return. And as you can see, I mean, this isn't upgraded, but as you can see, the armor piercing and semi-armor piercing are very close to each other, which is interesting because, for example, if we look, let's take a quick detour to the cruisers. So if we look at the Trento, for example, the drift between semi-armor piercing and armor piercing in damage is much more pronounced than what we see on the battleships. So for those of you, I'm going to make a very quick detour. For those of you who are not aware of the semi-armor piercing, armor piercing, high explosive ammunition and the differences between these three, if you talk about penetration, the high explosive has the lowest penetration, followed by the semi-armor piercing, and then the armor piercing has the highest penetration. In terms of mechanics, we have when a shell hits the target, there's several things that can happen. With a high explosive, you can have a semi-penetration for 50% damage, or you can have a full penetration for 100% damage. You cannot have an over-penetration or a bounce. These don't happen on high explosive. In return, you generally have the lowest amount of damage dealt and the lowest penetration. But they can also set fires, so damage over time. Semi-armor piercing, while having a higher penetration than high explosive, has generally a lower penetration than armor piercing shells, but has the highest alpha damage of all of them. Now, semi-armor piercing, just like armor piercing, can have all four possible outcomes when it hits. It can be a full penetration for 100% damage, it can be a semi-penetration for 50% damage, it can be, I think it can be an over-penetration for 25%, it definitely can be a bounce for 0% damage. So in terms of penetration mechanics, the semi-armor piercing works exactly like the armor piercing. The difference being that the actual penetration is lower than on the armor piercing. In return, the alpha damage is higher. And then lastly, you have the armor piercing, which once again has the same thing. Most of the time you're not going to get fires from armor piercing and semi-armor piercing. It is extremely rare, and I'm not sure if it's a bug or not. But that's in general the difference. Now, again, with the cruisers, with the 203mm, which is the highest caliber we've seen so far, the semi-armor piercing was pretty good, and oftentimes was worth using that. And where it gets really, really interesting is against destroyers. But that's something we'll get into later. I just wanted to make very quickly sure that we're all on the same page as to what the difference is between high explosive, semi-armor piercing, and armor piercing. At tier 7, we have the Francesco Caracciolo, which is starting to get a little bit higher in caliber finally. And we've got 8 381mm guns. I think these are technically the same guns as you find on the Roma. Obviously, they're not upgraded, so we can't really see it. And obviously, Roma, again, is one of the premiums, which don't have the semi-armor piercing shots. At tier 8, we then get the Vittorio Veneto, the Littorio class battleship, which is technically a sister ship of Roma, and has technically the same guns, but with slightly different stats. And we will do a slide. By the time you see this, you will have read the post. So yes, we will do a Vittorio Veneto review on Thursday. I just want to get through, a little bit of the tech tree and just get the basics out of the way. So here we've got effectively the same layout as on Roma, and but it's once again it's a tech tree ship, and we're dealing with semi-armor piercing. And at tier 9 we have the Lepanto. And this thing gets quadruple turrets, so similar to what the French are doing at times, with 2 forward, 1 aft, and so 3 of them. Other than that, I think they're once again the exact same guns as you have on the Roma or on the Vittorio Veneto. But going back to the Conte de Cavour. So this is a Conte de Cavour class. If we look at the Giulio Cesare is also a Conte de Cavour class. Now, the Giulio Cesare has a reputation at tier 5 because that thing is extremely good. It is one of the best mid-tier or tier 5 battleships. And that is the reason for that is not because it's particularly well armored, but because it is very maneuverable. It is pretty quick, and the guns, while being 320mm, are pretty punchy as well. So this is a very, very good tier 5 ship. Now, if we look at the Conte de Cavour, we find out that this ship does not have the same, does not quite have the same armor. As you see, the damage reduction is a bit lower, and she is actually. Why am I doing this? We can do this probably via the comparison tool. That's a bit less manual. Okay, let's do this. All right, so the Conte de Cavour gets the semi-armor piercing, that's this symbol, but it doesn't get any ship skills. Ship skills is the other thing we need to look at. We'll do that in a second. I just want to do this comparison first. The Giulio Cesare gets the precise aiming. Other than that, there's pretty much dreadnought ships from the onset of the First World War, both of them. But as you can see, the Giulio Cesare is a little bit better armored and is definitely faster, and also has bigger guns. Now, these are technically the same guns because what happened was that both ships in the interwar period were rebuilt, and what they did with these guys, so they got better. They got a lot of improvements. That's also where the better armor comes from. And what they did with the 305mm guns was they were boring them out. So they were increasing the inside of the barrels. They were not getting new guns because you can't easily fit new guns into a ship. That is, well, a lot of work. Because bigger guns mean a bigger turret potentially. It means heavier. It means you need different setup. Might need different barbettes. The whole ring setup might not work. So this is not something you easily do. So what they've done is they've literally just bored them out a little bit bigger to fit a larger caliber in, and that's where we're seeing these 320mm coming in. So the difference between the Conte de Cavour and the Giulio Cesare, besides the fact that the Conte de Cavour gets semi-armor piercing, is that, well, one of them is the World War I version. The other one is the interwar refit. And that is what makes the Giulio Cesare so powerful. Other than that, they're very, very similar. So they do have 120mm secondaries, and the Cesare gets a little bit better AA, but at mid-tier you're not going to get a large amount of things out of your AA. So I was talking about ship skills, so let's have a quick look at that. As we've just seen, the Conte de Cavour doesn't get any. But if we start looking at the Andrea Doria, she starts getting a fuel smoke. And that's not something you normally see on battleships. You do see that on Italian cruisers, and this is the same mechanic. So fuel smokes are different from regular smokes. They're much more short duration, but you can take them with you. So in and that makes a lot of sense for a battleship, because in a regular smoke, you actually have to stop the ship to stay inside the smoke screen. And then you sit in the smoke screen, preferably not stationary, because you can be blind fired, until the smoke screen dissipates, and then you start moving again. This makes sense for a destroyer, which is very, very quick to stop and very quick to start again. Something the size of a battleship, not so much. So you really wouldn't want a smoke screen in a battleship where you would have to stop the whole damn thing and then put up the smoke and then start moving again once your smoke starts dissipating. So the fuel smoke's actually quite useful here, because while they are a lot shorter duration, you can take them with you. So you can run at full speed and you stay hidden inside your smoke for the duration of the smoke. The use of this, just like in the Italian cruisers, is not to stop the ship and sit in the smoke. That's not what these things are for. These things are for covering maneuvers. So let's say you're in an Italian cruiser or battleship, starting at tier 6, and you are coming under fire, or you need to make a turn and you have to give broadside at relatively close range to an enemy, or you are in a close range fight with an enemy ship and you need to have the advantage of getting them to waste a salvo. So what you can do is you can use this smoke screen to disappear for 10 seconds or so, and use that to cover your turn, such that you're not as easily targetable. So that's sort of the use you get out of these things. So starting at tier 6, we get two charges of smoke 1. At tier 7, we get 2 charges of fuel smoke 2. The difference being that this lasts for actually 15 seconds, which is quite a long time actually. And at tier 8, we are starting to get the scout planes. Now, we've seen the scout planes before. I think it was introduced with the Black Yamato. And what that does is it gives you more range, but that's not the important bit. The important bit is that it has 2 other things. One that it doesn't really say here. One of them is that you get an elevated view. So you're not quite getting the top-down view that you have on an aircraft carrier, but you get an elevated view, like somewhere in the middle, that allows you to target ships better. So, for example, it allows you to peek behind islands. It also spots, as far as I know, because it's literally just an aircraft, but it doesn't really, you can't control it. It just sort of circles around you, and it allows you to get a better view angle on your targets at long range. And it is really quite useful for these sort of things. Although, just like with the Black Yamato, you do have to remember that there often are rendering issues because the game engine just doesn't render things at extreme ranges. So I'm not sure if this was going to work really well at 15, 16 kilometer ranges, because then you just tend to see a lot of stuttering for ships at that range if you want to target them. So the 12% firing range isn't really the main thing for me. The main thing for me is the elevated view position, which can make targeting other things a lot easier. So that would be the Vittorio Veneto, and the Lepanto at tier 9 actually gets the fuel smoke 3, which lasts for a full 20 seconds. That is massive, actually. That is a very, very long time, and you can take it with you. And it gets a scout plane too, which once again gives it better range. So we're going to look at the ships in more details as I'm going to go through the reviews. But the general characteristics of these ships are, and this is once again somewhat in line with what the Italians were historically doing. The armor plating is okay. They're not hugely tanky, but their focus is on firepower, and especially in the upper tiers like the Vittorio Veneto class. These guns hit hard. I'm not going to spoil it, but they do. The other thing that we're going to have to consider is what you can do with these shells, right? So as you can see here, and this is an upgraded Conte de Cavour. Interestingly enough, the semi-armor piercing is actually doing less damage than the armor piercing. This is new because generally the semi-armor piercing was considered to be well, more powerful than the armor-piercing shells in terms of alpha damage, not in terms of penetration. So this is a deviation from that paradigm, what we've seen on the cruisers. And if we're going to, I have fully upgraded the Vittorio Veneto here as well. We see that it kind of turns around here, so the SAP is more powerful, but not by a large amount. So what can you do with this? Well, just like with high explosive and armor piercing on battleships, you need to know what to use against which target. The armor piercing penetration on the Italian battleships isn't bad. The 305s here are okay. They're not grand, but they're okay in terms of armor piercing penetration. The semi-armor piercing penetration on the 305s on the Conte de Cavour is lackluster. But what you can use it against is destroyers. And that's where it gets really, really interesting. Because what the semi-armor piercing has is lower penetration. Now, the problem you have if you're shooting armor piercing shells at destroyers from a battleship, at large caliber armor piercing shells, especially at mid to close ranges, is that they will overpenetrate. Which means that instead of doing 1,000 points of damage, minus the destroyers, the armor plating and damage reduction, they're just doing 25% of that, so like 250 odd or less damage against the destroyer. So you can blast a full salvo of battleship armor piercing at a destroyer at point blank range, and it'll hurt it, but it'll not sink it. And then the destroyer torpedoes you, and then you have problems. So that's because the shells literally have too much penetration. They just go through the thing. And destroyers, I think, don't get the citadel mechanics. It has shown up very, very occasionally, but I haven't seen it in a long time. So you can't citadel a destroyer like you could a light cruiser. So these shells will just go plonk right through it. The semi-armor piercing doesn't do that. And yeah, slight spoiler alert. Also, the higher tier semi-armor piercing with 381mm doesn't do that. So, for reference, and I apologize, I know that this is going to get a little long-winded, but there's a lot of new stuff in this tech tree, and I think that's the big questions that everyone's going to ask. Let's have a look at let's have a look at a British battleship. Let's look at the tier 5. So let's look at the Iron Duke, and actually throw that in here, and compare these two. So the Iron Duke has 343mm. Has 343mm main guns, and they do a high explosive damage of 1064. High explosive is what you want to use in British battleships against a lot of targets, but especially against destroyers. So British battleships are well known for destroyers to be very, very careful with, because they do often come with a high explosive preloaded. British high explosive has better penetration than other nations, but obviously it's not as good as the armor piercing. But interestingly enough, as you can see, it does the exact same amount of damage with the semi-armor piercing on the Italians here. So, and these semi-armor piercing shells will have better penetration than the high explosive, it's hard to tell really how exactly it is, but especially at higher tiers, it probably will have better penetration than the high explosive. So, just like British battleships, if you're in a destroyer and you decide that you want to broadside an Italian battleship because you're assuming that they have the armor piercing loaded, be careful. Because this thing can do about 10,000 damage in a single strike against a destroyer. So, and they tend to have secondaries as well. So this is just the same rule applies as on the British battleships. If you're in a destroyer, be very, very careful. If these things tend to have the semi-armor piercing loaded, they will absolutely wreck you. And once again, we're going to see the details in the higher tiers with the Vittorio Veneto as well. We'll get to that later. All right then. The one last item that I want to mention, and I'm going to take the tier 5 out here, that is relatively common here with these ships, and we will see that in the higher tiers, is that, actually, and this might be easier, is that they have a very good torpedo damage reduction. And that is the, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Pugliese system, named after the inventor It didn't really work that well in practice, but it's effectively a set of spaces around the bulges on the side of the ship that was meant to take the torpedo impact. So these things have a pretty good torpedo damage reduction. Combine that, so taking them out as a destroyer is not going to be as easy. Combine that with the absolutely devastating semi-armor piercing shells, and you really, really need to watch out if you're in a DD that these things. Plus, they can go smoke up. So that's a thing as well. Anyway, I've set up the Conte de Cavour just to, get a comparison with the Giulio Cesare, and we will put the regular camo on it, also because it's a tier 5 and doesn't get a historical camo, so there's not much you can do. Skill-wise for commanders, there isn't that much you can use, especially for this lower tiers. You probably want to take the Mistweaver, even though the lower fuel smokes don't have that much of a duration. So on a 10-second fuel smoke, you get an additional 1.5 seconds. But on a 20 seconds fuel smoke, you get it up to 23 seconds, which is already starting to look pretty good. And it also reduces the cooldown time, so that's a good thing as well. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's any skill here relevant to scout planes. And unless the tier 10 ship gets any particular skill that requires captain setup, you can focus on damage control, healing, and things like that. Because one thing that these things don't have is resistance to fires. They are absolute fire magnets. These things are burning as bad as German battleships. So if you can, do something about the fires, because you will be set on fire. And they don't also have the greatest of AA. So planes, dive bombers especially, are really, really annoying. And torpedo bombers sending floods, obviously. Right, so enough talking. Let's do a round in the Conte de Cavour and just have a quick comparison and look how this ship plays. We are actually bottom tier in this game, and there is a Giulio Cesare, the premium Conte de Cavour, the rebuilt version, on our team as well. We're up against a Bogue, so it's carrier battle, a Fuso, Bayern, another Conte de Cavour, a Nuremberg, a Kirov, and a Kamikaze. So let's start that. You start out with semi-armor piercing loaded. And what I would recommend, depending on, is to pay close attention to the opening screen. If you are likely to play aggressively and to face an enemy destroyer early on, leave the semi-armor piercing. As for on the tier 5, everything else, armor piercing is the better choice. Because the SAP will, even against, it can Citadel, but against light cruisers, you might be better off with that. So that's why I'm switching over here to the armor piercing, because there's only one destroyer in the game, and I have a cruiser next to me. But yeah, don't forget. So in this case, I have a Nuremberg, which is a very, very good cruiser. So I'm assuming that he can take care of the destroyer if he should come into close range. And I'm going to more be using the armor piercing here. But yeah, don't forget that if you need to, you can play this cruiser role, just like you could in a British battleship, such that if destroyers come close, you can totally pretend to be a cruiser for a while, because these are pretty effective. Okay, enemy Nuremberg spotted, light cruiser. There is the Kamikaze, so I could have had the semi-armor piercing. I am using the armor piercing here because the 305s don't have the greatest range, but as you can see, 266 points. Over penetration, right? Semi-armor piercing would have done 1,000 points of damage here. So that salvo would have been better shot at the Nuremberg. Now we just need to dodge the torpedoes. There's also a Fuso, and yeah, against battleships, in most cases you want to just dodging his salvo here. You want to use the armor piercing, unless you really need to do that little bit of extra damage. And what you can do is you can focus fire the semi-armor piercing into weak points. So you can use it into, let's say, if you're struggling to penetrate a battleship and you have shots and you have the aim, you have the close range, and you have the shots, you can use the SAP into the bow or stern sections. Now I'm not sure what the Nuremberg's doing. He's trying to shield me here, but yeah, we should do this the other way around because I'm the battleship. The Conte de Cavour also doesn't have the greatest hit point pool really, with 32,000. It's really on the lower end of the range here. So let's get behind the island. It's often a little bit more battle cruiser play. The guns are okayishly accurate actually. I'm a fire 10 guns full salvo against the Bowin German battleship. 6 hits is not bad. So nice and precise they are actually. And but yeah, the armor piercing is probably what you want to use most of the time, unless you're facing destroyers. Okay, that Nuremberg is running, he's out of my range, but that Bayern needs killing over there, and then we can loop around into B Cup. Okay, Bayern's already dead. Giulio Cesare read my mind. I'm switching to this to the SAP because there's the kamikaze in B Cup, and if he decides, I mean, he's on extremely low health, so it wouldn't really matter. But if he decides he wants to do something about me, then I have got the right ammunition type loaded. It's not that the SAP can't hurt other ships, but it definitely doesn't have the same amount of penetration that you would really need. So if I'm firing at that Fuso over there, for example, this would be the wrong ammo type. Okay, it looks like the kamikaze is running, but I am trying to get some shots out. Unfortunately, he is in front of the Fuso, so locking on is a little difficult, which means that the rangefinders were on the wrong setting here. But he's on very low health, so it really wouldn't just need one hit. I was waiting for him to come out from the island. So I'm going to get one more salvo out, and maybe the main guns, but it looks like he just dodges. Okay, back to the armor piercing, because we have an enemy Conte de Cavour over here. The secondaries are pretty good on these things as well, I mean, especially on the higher tiers. And they do get low caliber auto secondaries, but don't forget about them. You can definitely use them. Okay, so it's time to get into the cup. Conte de Cavour is not the fastest ship because she is a dreadnought. She is not the rebuild, so she's got World War I engines when everybody thought 21 knots was, the bee's knees. So at this range, definitely armor piercing, and we can citadel them right through the side, and that thing is dead. Which leaves them. Well, there's a Kirov over there. There's still that Nuremberg over there. And once again, armor piercing is the ammunition of choice here. Not sure where these torpedoes came from, but not any danger. So now it's just a question of which target do we want to shoot at first. Nuremberg's giving a nice flat broadside, so shots out at that thing. And see what that does. Yeah, that was okay. Half the 50% is a decent ratio at this range. And yeah, I think they don't have much left. We've only lost one destroyer so far. We're holding 2 caps. Of course, I'm on fire, so be very careful with your damage controls on these things, because you get set on fire quite a bit. Shots out once more. Half of them go into the island, and there's a Fuso ahead of us. So a couple more good hits on the Nuremberg. You see what I mean with the guns being nice and precise, really. I'm not sure if they were meant to be played at long range. Oh, that Kirov just took a bad hit. And I think the Nuremberg is deciding that he wants to make a turn, and the Kirov is backing up behind the island. So Nuremberg's probably the better choice. He also needs to dodge these torpedoes, so he can't maneuver. So shots out. And can we delete him? Not quite. But Giulio Cesare once again takes him out. Now I just have the Kirov or the Fuso. So I'm going to play with the Fuso a bit here. Yeah, they are. I'm not sure if they're meant to be played at long range, because the guns are really actually nice and precise. But I prefer more of a battle cruiser style, just get nice and close. And as you can see, the armor piercing isn't going to do a great amount. So now I'm switching over, because I'm getting semi-pens on the Fuso, because these are only 305mm guns. But so I'm switching to the semi-armor piercing, and what I can do here is I can target the bow section of the Fuso, because there's a decent chance, and it does the same amount of damage. It does a little bit more. It doesn't really make a big difference, but I don't want to over-penetrate the bow section. And I'm not sure if the armor piercing would over-penetrate, but I'm relatively certain, and there you can see it, that the semi-armor piercing doesn't. So that was a good chunk out of the Fuso. So if you're in these sort of situations, in a close-range brawl, and you can target these things, you can easily switch over to the SAP, which does the same alpha damage. And you're not going to get any citadels by shooting through bow or stern. But you are definitely going to get some guaranteed damage out of this, and you're not going to be over-penetrating. So the SAP is a decent choice for brawls, when you're just trying to do as much alpha damage as you can without over-penetrating. And you can use it against cruisers as well. I mean, you've seen the hits on the Kirov there, and once again, Giulio Cesare just deletes that thing. Not a bad ammunition choice, but as you can see, also the armor piercing has struggled a little bit against the Fuso. That's down to the to the relatively low caliber that you're sailing here. The Giulio Cesare, unsurprisingly, because that is the interwar refitted ship of this refitted sister ship, has taken the cake. But yeah, it's a bit slow for a mid-tier. It's kind of, but it's not bad. It's not a broadside on. It's not a broadside on brawler, but she's quite versatile. So you can do a lot of things with these ships. You can play aggressively, more like battle cruiser style, or you can play long range with a decent dispersion. You can defend yourself against destroyers using the semi-armor piercing, and the only thing that these things are not good at is dealing with AA or HE spammers. All right, I think that's about as much as I want to go into detail right now. So I am personally very excited about this line. I haven't tried any of the mid-tiers. I have only played the Conte de Cavour and the Vittorio Veneto, because, well, obviously it's the Giulio Cesare and the Roma, which we already know, so I wanted to see how these two compare. I haven't played tier 6 and 7 or tier 9 yet, and that will come. So for now, that's it for today. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.